My name is Eleanor Whitman. I'm 29 years old, and my husband Daniel and I had been waiting 4 long years for the moment we finally got to announce. Last Saturday, we were hosting a small gathering at our home to tell our family we were expecting our first baby. A little girl, due in May. I had the ultrasound photos framed on the mantel, a pink cake hidden in the kitchen, and tiny knit booties sitting inside a gift box ready to pass around the room. But halfway through the celebration, my sister-in-law stood up in front of everyone, held up her phone, and announced that the baby I was carrying didn't belong to my husband. She had a DNA report in her hand. She had screenshots. She had what looked like a recorded voicemail from a man nobody in the room recognized. Within 30 seconds, the entire room went silent. My mother-in-law started crying. My husband's hand went cold in mine. But instead of begging or breaking down, I just smiled. Because 5 days before that party, something had shown up on my phone that Vanessa didn't know about, and what happened next exposed her in front of every single person she had tried to manipulate. But before I tell you exactly what was on that evidence and how the truth came out, please like this video, subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Now let me tell you about the afternoon my husband's sister tried to destroy my marriage and how it ended up destroying her instead. Daniel and I had been trying to have a baby for almost 4 years. 2 rounds of fertility treatments, 1 miscarriage at 11 weeks that nearly broke me, and more negative tests than I could count. When the little line finally turned pink back in October, I sat on our bathroom floor and cried for almost an hour before I could bring myself to walk downstairs and tell Daniel. He dropped the coffee pot in the sink. That's how happy he was. We waited until the 2nd trimester before telling anyone, because after what happened the last time, neither of us could handle another round of sympathy calls. But once we hit 16 weeks and saw her little face on the ultrasound, we decided it was time. We were going to throw a small afternoon gathering at our house in Charlotte, just immediate family and a few close friends. Nothing fancy. I wanted it soft, warm, intimate. The kind of afternoon you remember forever. The only person I wasn't sure about inviting was Daniel's younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 32, recently divorced, and had spent the last 6 years making my life quietly miserable. When Daniel first brought me home to meet his family, she smiled a little too tightly and asked where I went to school, what my parents did for a living, and whether I was planning to keep working after I got married. She said it all with a laugh, like it was just curiosity. But I could feel the weight of every question. Over the years, the comments never really stopped. Little jabs at holidays about how I must feel grateful Daniel chose me. Comments at family dinners about how nice it was that I had married up. Whispered jokes to her cousins about my hometown being a town nobody had ever heard of. I used to tell Daniel about it, but he always said the same thing. Vanessa was jealous because her marriage was falling apart. Vanessa was under a lot of stress. Vanessa didn't really mean it. I stopped bringing it up after a while because every time I did, I was the one who looked like the troublemaker. Still, she was Daniel's sister and the only sibling he had left since their older brother passed away in a car accident in 2018. So I invited her. I even called her personally 2 weeks before the party to tell her about the pregnancy in private so she wouldn't find out in front of everyone. She was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, "Oh, congratulations. That's unexpected." She didn't ask how far along I was. She didn't ask if it was a boy or a girl. She just said she'd try to come and hung up. I stood in the kitchen staring at my phone for almost a full minute before I shook it off and told myself she was probably just surprised. The party started at 2 in the afternoon. Daniel's parents arrived first, both of them crying before they even got through the door. His mother, Patricia, hugged me so hard my feet came off the ground. His father, Walter, kept shaking Daniel's hand and saying the same thing over and over, "You're going to be a wonderful dad. You're going to be a wonderful dad." My own parents drove up from Atlanta and brought a stuffed bear almost as big as me. My best friend Marissa showed up with champagne for everyone else and sparkling grape juice for me. By 2:30, the house was full. Music was playing softly in the background, somebody was laughing by the food table, and I could smell the lemon cake my mother had insisted on baking herself. Then Vanessa walked in. She was wearing a black dress that seemed a little formal for an afternoon baby announcement, and she was carrying a large leather tote bag that looked heavier than it should have. She kissed her mother on the cheek, nodded at Daniel, and looked directly past me without saying a word. I told myself not to let it bother me. I had more important things to focus on. But I noticed that instead of joining the rest of the guests in the living room, Vanessa drifted over to the corner near the dining room, where she stood by herself, scrolling on her phone and glancing up at me every few minutes. My mother-in-law asked her twice to come and sit down. Vanessa said she was fine where she was. Around 3:30, Daniel tapped his glass with a spoon and everyone turned toward us. I had the ultrasound photo in my hand, and Daniel had his arm around my shoulder. He thanked everyone for coming and said he and I had an announcement. Then he looked at me and nodded, and I lifted the photo for everyone to see and said the words I had been waiting 4 years to say. "We're having a little girl." The room absolutely erupted. My mother-in-law was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. My father was already reaching into his jacket for his handkerchief. Marissa was screaming and clapping. People were coming toward us with their arms open, one after another, and Daniel was laughing and pulling me closer and kissing the side of my head. It was the happiest I had ever seen him. For a moment, I forgot Vanessa was even in the room. And then, from the corner, a voice cut through the celebration. "Before everyone gets carried away, I think you should know something." The whole room froze. People turned slowly, confused, trying to figure out who had spoken. Vanessa stepped away from the dining room wall and walked into the middle of the living room, holding up her phone. Her face was calm. Too calm. She looked like someone who had rehearsed this. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was steady, "I need to tell you something, and I'm sorry it has to be now, but you deserve to know before this goes any further." Daniel's arm was still around my shoulder, but I could feel his whole body tense up. He asked her what she was talking about. She looked at me, and her mouth curved into the faintest smile I had ever seen from her. Then she turned her phone around so the screen faced the room. "That baby," she said, "isn't yours." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt the air leave my lungs. Somebody, I think it was my mother, let out a small sound, like she had been hit. My mother-in-law's hands flew to her mouth. Vanessa kept talking. She said she hadn't wanted to be the one to say anything, but she had found out 2 months ago that I had been seeing a man named Aaron Mercer, an old coworker from my job at the design firm. She said she had his phone number. She said she had recordings. And then she held up a piece of paper and said that she also had a DNA pre-screening report that proved the baby wasn't Daniel's. The room exploded into whispers. My father was on his feet asking what was happening. My mother had both hands pressed against her chest. Daniel's arm slowly slipped off my shoulder. He took one step back from me, just one, but I felt it like a door slamming shut. He stared at the phone in Vanessa's hand, and then he stared at the paper, and then he stared at me. His face was gray. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Tell me this isn't true." Vanessa started walking around the room, showing people the screen. Some of them turned away, some of them leaned in. My mother-in-law was crying openly now, and my father-in-law looked like he was going to be sick. Marissa shouted at Vanessa to stop, but Vanessa kept going. She said there was a voicemail too. She played it on speaker. A man's voice came through the phone, grainy and short, saying something about missing her and how they needed to talk about the baby soon. It sounded real. It sounded damning. A few of the older relatives gasped. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten and his eyes start to fill with tears. And that's when Vanessa made her mistake. She looked at me, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to collapse the way she had pictured in her head for weeks, maybe months. But I didn't. I took a slow breath. I placed my hand gently on my stomach, and then I smiled. Vanessa's face changed. Just a flicker. But I saw it. "Why are you smiling?" she snapped. "You think this is funny?" I shook my head and told her that no, I didn't think it was funny at all. I thought it was actually very sad. I thought it was sad that she had spent so much time preparing this. I thought it was sad that she had chosen today, of all days, to do it. And I thought it was sad that she had underestimated me this badly. Vanessa laughed, but the laugh was too sharp. She said I was trying to distract everyone because I had been caught. She said Daniel deserved better than a wife who would lie to his face for months. She said I should stop pretending and just admit what I had done so we could all move on. I looked over at the TV mounted above our fireplace. Then I looked at Daniel, who was still staring at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. I told him to stay where he was. I told everyone to stay where they were. And then I turned to Vanessa and said the words that wiped the expression right off her face. Vanessa, since you brought all this evidence, why don't we connect your phone to the TV so everyone can see it clearly? The room went silent again. Vanessa blinked at me. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Daniel turned slowly toward her. Even Patricia stopped crying long enough to look up. I kept my voice calm. The screen is small, I said. If you want everyone to see the proof, let's put it on the big screen. That way, there's no confusion. No misunderstanding. Everyone can read the messages themselves. Everyone can see the report. Everyone can hear the voicemail clearly. If what you're saying is true, Vanessa, you have nothing to worry about. Vanessa stepped back. She hugged her phone closer to her chest. She said that wasn't necessary. She said the phone was personal. She said she didn't want her private information on the television. A few of the guests exchanged looks, and Marissa, bless her, crossed her arms and said loudly, "Why not, Vanessa? You already showed half of us anyway." Daniel turned to his sister and asked her quietly to hand him her phone. Vanessa hesitated. She said, "Daniel, come on, this isn't about me." Daniel repeated himself, slower and firmer this time. "Give me your phone, Vanessa." Walter, my father-in-law, stood up from the couch. "Give your brother your phone," he said. His voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. Vanessa's hand was trembling when she finally held it out. Daniel took it and walked to the cable near the TV, the one we used to cast videos and photos during family movie nights. He plugged the phone in without a word. A second later, the screen came to life on our 70-inch TV above the fireplace, and everything that had been on Vanessa's phone was now right there for the entire room to see. The messages she had been showing around were up first, a conversation that looked like it had been exchanged between me and someone named Aaron. Sweet little notes. A few photos. Even a message where I supposedly said I couldn't wait to tell him about the baby. The guests stared at the screen, reading silently. My mother made another small sound. Daniel didn't move. I let them read. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I just waited. When the whispers started again, I spoke. I told the room that I wanted them to notice something. I asked Daniel to scroll up to the very beginning of that conversation. He did. At the top of the screen, there was a date. The first message in that thread had been sent 4 weeks ago, on the 18th of last month. I asked everyone to remember that date. Then I took my own phone out of my pocket. I told Daniel to unplug Vanessa's phone, and I told him to plug mine in instead. He looked at me, confused, but he did it. My home screen came up on the TV. Then I opened my email, and I scrolled to a message I had received exactly 5 days earlier. A security alert. From the account I used for my email, my cloud photos, and my messaging app. The email informed me that an unrecognized device had attempted to access my account and had successfully pulled a backup of my message history. The alert included the time, the device name, and the approximate location of the login. The device name was Vanessa Whitman's MacBook. The location was her apartment address in Raleigh. The date of the login was the 16th of last month. 2 days before those messages had supposedly been sent between me and a man named Aaron. The room went dead silent. Daniel stared at the screen. He read the email once. Then he read it again. Then he turned his head very slowly and looked at his sister. Vanessa's face had gone from pink to white to a kind of blotchy red. She opened her mouth and said that the email was fake. She said I could have made it myself. She said anyone could fake a screenshot. Her voice was shaking now, and not just a little. I told her I had anticipated she would say that. So I had asked a friend of mine who works in cybersecurity to help me look into it, just to be safe, because the security alert had worried me even before I knew what it was going to be used for. I told the room that my friend had pulled the server logs directly from the email provider. He had verified that the access was real. He had traced the IP address, matched it to the device, and written up a short report. I pressed one button on my phone. The screen changed. A clean, official-looking document appeared. A summary report with a timestamp, an IP address, a device identifier, and a location. At the top of the report, in bold letters, was the line that made Vanessa's knees visibly buckle. Unauthorized access originated from the MacBook registered to Vanessa Whitman at 2914 Fairlake Avenue, Raleigh, North Carolina. Patricia let out a sound like an animal. Walter stood up again, but this time he didn't know where to go, so he just stood there in the middle of the living room with his hands at his sides. Daniel had not moved an inch. His eyes were fixed on the television. Vanessa said, "Daniel, that report could have been written by anyone. She's lying. She's trying to turn you against me." But nobody was listening to her anymore. Everyone in that room was watching Daniel. Everyone in that room was watching me. And I wasn't finished. I told the room that after I saw the security alert, I didn't just ask my friend to verify the hack. I asked him to look into what Vanessa might have been trying to access. Why she had gone into my accounts. What she had been looking for. Because it didn't make any sense to me that she would steal my messages just to fabricate an affair. The effort was too much. The risk was too high. Something about it didn't fit. My friend had spent the last 4 days tracing her digital activity across any public records and accounts connected to her name, and what he found wasn't just about me. I pressed the button again. The screen changed again. This time, a bank statement appeared. It was a statement from the Family Charitable Foundation, the one that had been set up in 2019 in honor of Daniel's older brother, the one who had passed away. The foundation that the whole family had donated to over the years to fund a scholarship at the local high school. The foundation that Vanessa had volunteered to manage 2 years ago because, in her words, she wanted to do something meaningful after her divorce. The statement showed 6 transfers over the last 14 months. Each one was between $9,000 and $11,000. Each one was marked as an administrative expense. Each one had been deposited into a personal account. And at the bottom of the screen, the name attached to that personal account was Vanessa Marie Whitman. The total at the bottom of the screen read $67,400. Patricia screamed. That's the only way to describe it. She put both hands on top of her head and she screamed, and then she started sobbing so hard that my father-in-law had to sit her down in the armchair. Daniel turned toward Vanessa, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw real anger in his face. Not hurt, not confusion. Anger. "Vanessa," he said, "what did you do?" Vanessa started shaking her head. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said the foundation needed money for administrative costs. She said she had been planning to put it back. She said she had been under a lot of pressure after the divorce. Her voice was going higher and higher. I cut in quietly. I told her the rest. I told the room that Vanessa had figured out, at some point in the last few months, that I had started helping the family with the foundation's paperwork. Daniel had asked me in September to look over the year-end filings because he was swamped at his own firm. I had noticed the irregularities almost immediately. The transfers. The missing receipts. The round numbers designed to stay under the threshold that would trigger an internal audit. I hadn't said anything yet, because I wanted to be absolutely sure before I brought it to Daniel. I was going to tell him after the baby announcement. I hadn't wanted to ruin his month. But Vanessa must have known I was close to finding out, because she had hacked into my accounts. She had fabricated an affair. She had written fake messages to a man who didn't exist. She had staged the whole thing at our baby announcement because she knew that if my marriage blew up first, if Daniel threw me out of the house that afternoon, then whatever I said later about the foundation would sound like revenge. Like a woman scorned trying to drag his sister down with her. Daniel sat down on the arm of the couch like his legs had stopped working. He put both hands over his face. Vanessa was crying now. She said I was twisting everything. She said I was making her look like a monster. She said she had never meant to hurt anybody. She said she had done it because she loved her brother and she didn't want him to get hurt. Walter, my father-in-law, finally spoke. His voice was low, and it was the voice I had never heard him use in the 6 years I had known him. "You stole from your dead brother's memorial fund," he said. Vanessa Frazi. "You stole from the scholarship we set up for him," Walter said. "You took money from the fund we started so kids in his name could go to college. You took it. And then when your sister-in-law was about to find out, you tried to humiliate her at her baby announcement in front of your mother." Vanessa's mouth opened. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. I walked over to the counter where my phone was plugged in, and I picked up another item I had kept tucked behind the fruit bowl since that morning. It was a thin manila folder. I had debated whether to bring it out at all. I had hoped, honestly, that I would never have to. But Vanessa hadn't given me a choice. I told the room that earlier that week, I had met with an attorney and with 2 officers from the County Financial Crimes Unit. I had given them copies of every document my friend had pulled. They had opened a formal file. They were already aware of the situation. I had been planning to wait a few more days to tell Daniel so we could handle it as a family first, but Vanessa had made that impossible. I looked over at Daniel. I told him I was sorry. I told him I had been trying to find the right moment. Daniel looked up from his hands. His eyes were red. He nodded slowly and said I didn't owe him an apology for anything. Patricia was the one who finally stood up. She walked across the living room with her jaw set and her shoulders shaking, and she stopped directly in front of Vanessa. She looked her daughter in the eye, and her voice was quiet and broken, and she said, "You need to leave this house." Vanessa started to argue. Patricia shook her head and said it again. "Leave. Now. Before I have to do something I will regret for the rest of my life." Vanessa picked up her bag with shaking hands. She started to say something to Daniel, but he didn't look at her. She started to say something to me, and I just turned my face away. She walked out of the living room, through the foyer, and out the front door. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than anything else that had happened that afternoon. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Marissa, who had been standing quietly by the food table the whole time, walked over and wrapped her arms around me. My mother came next. Then Patricia, who was still crying, who held both my hands and kept saying she was sorry over and over until I asked her to please stop. Walter put his hand on Daniel's shoulder and said something to him that I didn't hear. And Daniel came across the room and pulled me against his chest and held me for what felt like a very long time. He kept whispering the same thing into my hair. I should have known. I should have listened. I should have known. 2 weeks later, Vanessa was formally charged with wire fraud, embezzlement of charitable funds, and identity-related computer misuse. The district attorney accepted a plea deal in which she pled guilty to 2 felony counts. She was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison, ordered to pay full restitution to the foundation with interest, and barred from ever serving as an officer or administrator of any nonprofit organization again. The local paper ran a small article about it. My mother-in-law didn't read it. My father-in-law did, and then he threw the paper away and made himself a cup of coffee and didn't speak for 3 hours. Patricia has called me every single week since then, sometimes just to ask how the baby is doing, sometimes to ask me to forgive her for not seeing what her daughter was. I have told her there is nothing to forgive. She was a mother who loved her children. Vanessa made her own choices. Those choices were not Patricia's fault, and I will not let her carry them. My daughter Hazel was born in May. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. A full head of dark hair, just like her father. Daniel cried harder than I did in the delivery room, and when the nurse placed her on my chest, he kept saying the same thing over and over. "She's perfect. She's perfect. She's perfect." Patricia was the first person in the waiting room. She held Hazel for an hour and wouldn't let go until Walter gently reminded her that other people wanted a turn. Sometimes, late at night, when Hazel is asleep on my chest and the house is quiet, I think about that afternoon. About the moment my sister-in-law turned her phone toward the room and tried to end my marriage in front of the people I loved most. About how close she came to succeeding. About how easily that lie could have worked if I hadn't already seen the security alert, if I hadn't already known something was wrong with the foundation, if I hadn't already started quietly putting the pieces together. I think about how much of my life almost got taken from me by a woman who smiled at my wedding and held my hand at my miscarriage and called me her sister in front of strangers. And then Hazel makes a little sound in her sleep, and Daniel rolls over and puts his arm around both of us, and I remember something my grandmother used to tell me when I was a little girl. She used to say that the truth is a patient thing. It doesn't fight. It doesn't shout. It just waits. And when the time is right, it shows itself, and anyone who tried to bury it gets buried with it instead. That afternoon in our living room, in front of my family and my friends and the entire life I had built, the truth finally showed itself. And the person who spent 6 years trying to bury me ended up digging her own grave with her own 2 hands, and she didn't even realize it until she was already standing in it.